Now, last week you met Greg O'Grady as part of our Producers Challenge as we were taking a look at the difference, I think, between curtains and double glazed windows. That was the question that came up, but it became very apparent very quickly that Greg knows a lot about making homes thermally efficient. So we promised you we would get him back on the program and this time into our studio, which he's done for us today. Greg Grady, hello to you.
Sonia, nice to be back and answer a few more questions.
Yeah. Now, we wanted to have a broader discussion with you because it was very specific, the question we were asking you, but it was clear you had so much more knowledge. Where does this knowledge come from?
It's been a bit of a passion of mine, driven by my father, and who's come from Irish farming stock and very, very practically minded. So I suppose I was fortunate to have that very early knowledge, and we're talking from young years in working alongside Dad, with Dad sometimes not necessarily by choice, but I've learnt to do all sorts of bits and pieces around a house, understand the very basics about orientation of a home, the importance of insulation, the importance of just operating a house well, doing things like closing doors and windows at the right time, how you should build a house so that you have it at a height that doesn't give rise to water problems, drainage problems and things. So very, very basic things. And we're talking from the ages of like 5, 6, 7 onwards, and I'm soon to be 47. So
okay. And you would have had a lot of practical experience about this too, because you've renovated a few homes in your time.
Yes, yeah. So I'm working on my place in Belair in the Adelaide Hills at the moment, but I do have an interest in property. So the first home that I moved into when I moved out of the family home was an ex-housing trust property, 1952 built, and they're actually great bones of a house. So I enjoyed putting the skills to practice in that location. But yeah, it's just something that I've got a real passion for, and I want to see things improve in this area. All
right. Now, you're sitting here on what many people would say was a winter's day in a T-shirt, so I'm guessing you don't feel the cold that much.
I feel the cold like others, but I do typically find it quite warm inside buildings. So.
Okay. But that, I guess, sets the scene for this house you're working on in Belair at the moment, because you were telling me a short time ago that even you found this house cold.
Absolutely. 1960 build of a house. It was an early example of a passive solar design where it's taking advantage of the orientation of the house in regards to letting the winter sun and light in and keeping the summer sun out in particular. But this was a very cheaply built house, architecturally beautiful, thermally terrible. So there was no insulation in the house whatsoever, holes through the window frames and just gaps everywhere, through the floorboards. I could see sunlight through the floorboards. It was very drafty. And I've come to know one of the original owners, the daughter of the people that built the house, and she also recalls about how terribly hot it was in summer and freezing cold in winter. And I think Australians have just gotten used to that over the years, and we mask that problem now by putting on more air conditioning and heating and things like that. But the underlying house construction techniques haven't really changed as much as they should since the 1960s. I mean, insulation is something, for example, that's been a relatively new thing. And even today we see the insulation quality in houses being incredibly substandard. People don't realise, for example, that with ceiling insulation, which in Adelaide should be an R5 insulation rating, for example, a 5% gaps, if you like, through the insulation in the ceiling space will result in a 50% reduction in the performance of the insulation. So for somebody who's paying for R5 insulation and effectively getting R2.5, you're getting sort of...
So is that the quality of the insulation or the way it's laid?
The way that it's laid, yeah.
The way that it's laid.
The way that it's laid, so that the gaps within the ceiling insulation, which is the most important part. So you have to look at the whole house, ceiling, walls, underfloor if you've got timber floors. But the homeowners are completely unaware of generally completely unaware of what sort of things go into making a good thermally comfortable house.
See, we often do spend the money on the aesthetics, don't we, to make things look great, but it's not necessarily the best way to do it. And just in relation to insulation, I mean, that's not only good for thermal, and I know that's what we're focusing on today, but it also helps with sound projection, doesn't it?
Of course, yes.
Between rooms.
And you can get specific acoustic insulation as well. Last week when we were talking about windows, the double glazing makes a huge difference in regards to acoustic insulation. So, it provides two functions effectively for thermal and acoustic benefit.
We're talking here on ABC Radio Adelaide, South Australian Broken Hill, with Greg O'Grady. He's joined us in the studio. He's an electrical engineer by background, but through practice and work and doing this time and time again, he's become an expert on creating thermally efficient houses. Now, maybe you've got a question you'd like to throw his way. Now's the time to do it. Give us a ring on either 1300 222 891, text through 0467 922 891, or you can just text or phone by pressing the phone or text button on the ABC Listen app and get directly through to us to talk about some of these things. We talked to you about double glazed windows or heavy curtains, and I think in the end you were moving to you should have curtains. Regardless. So maybe just go with that.
If you've got a bit of money to spend improving the windows, well, exactly, do both. That is the ultimate answer. But people are limited by their available funds to spend improving the quality of the house. So windows typically is one of the last things that you'd hit if you're improving the existing housing stock.
Let's talk though about some of the things, because you can design a home, and I've got to say my sister lives in a home that is a big home with quite a few bedrooms, and I thought it would be very expensive to heat, but it's been architecturally designed in a way that you can walk in there at any time of the day and it never feels cold. It perhaps needs a bit of boost when it's very cold, but it seems to make the most of every day, and her heating bill is quite small. So that whatever they've done design-wise, they've made it so you can design a house that's thermally efficient. A lot of us live in homes that have already been established, and so we're looking at either retrofitting or dealing with what we've got.
Yep.
You mentioned insulation as being one of the big things that you can do. What are some of the other things that people can do quite easily?
Yes.
And make a huge difference?
Yeah, there's definitely DIY type options, and insulation is one of the very, very important things. Another one is the gap sealing. So there's a lot of older homes, and depending on the way they're built, even modern homes that are just riddled with gaps. So there's no point having insulation if you then start putting holes in your insulation. You've just got to bypass. So as I did mention last week, with respect to the windows, the interface between the window frame and the wall, there's often gaps around those areas. So something as simple as going around with
no gaps,
no more gaps, the caulking gun, and to seal up all of those gaps will make a big difference, because you're not losing your conditioned air inside the house to the unconditioned air outside. One of the callers last week talked about the high-level wall vents. And they exist in a lot of homes up through until the 1970s.
Weren't they led to let airflow happen and houses to move and shift and all of that sort of stuff?
So the reason that they're actually in place is going back to the days of unflued gas heaters and open fires. So it's really about managing that. It was the way of managing indoor air quality under those style circumstances, because ventilation in a home is something that is also very important, and that could be a whole other discussion in regards to managing air quality inside the house. But you'll see in no homes these days do we have those high level wall vents. Indoor air quality is managed through at the very basic opening, and using those windows that we've had. There's more sophisticated systems with heat recovery ventilation systems, so fan-based systems. But the general advice would be that unless you still do operate those vintage gas heaters, which would recommend that you don't, and open fireplaces and those sorts of things, that those high-level wall vents should be basically patched over, removed, and in the houses that I've had over the years, from 1952 through to the mid 70s, wherever I've been renovating, I will always remove those vents.
Yeah. All right. It's 18 minutes past 2. Now, Greg, I've got lots of questions coming for you, so do you mind me throwing them through? David's first up from Tea Tree Gully. Hello, David.
Yeah, g'day, guys. A quick question. I'll try and keep it concise. I've got a single brick garage that's down the block a little bit. I've turned it into a granny flat for my daughter. It's a building all on its own, built in the mid-60s with the house. It's got a concrete slab, single brick walls, and just a small ceiling space. I've turned it into a granny flat. I've completely sealed it up. I've built stud walls on the inside with insulation. I've put a bathroom, kitchen, everything in it. It's completely sealed. There's 2 very large windows on one side that face into the backyard. And in winter, now I find I've done too good a job and I have condensation running down those 2 windows like waterfall.
That doesn't sound good, David.
There's no ventilation. I've left nothing unblocked there. I've sealed the thing up tight like a drum, which is fantastic in summer. Like the split system aircon I put in there works brilliant. But now in winter, when it's warm in there, the condensation on those windows is horrendous. What have I done wrong?
By the sounds of it, from what you've described, you've done a lot of great things there, and it is actually a problem as we move towards what I'll call what's generally called the more high performing homes, where they're well insulated and well draft sealed, so nice and airtight is the term for that. That can give rise to a problem with condensation that'll form on the coldest surfaces. So in the case of this little granny flat garage, the windows. Air has got a certain capacity to absorb and hold moisture. Think of it a little bit like a sponge, and then depending on the circumstances, that sponge can be squeezed and that water will come out. The underlying problems are, you've got to understand, I suppose, where the moisture load is coming from within this granny flat. So you introduce moisture into any home through things like breathing, washing, cooking, showering, and if you have a really sealed up house, you're going to just keep elevating the moisture load within that house. That moisture, as I say, the air's only got a certain capacity. The sponge is only so good to absorb that and hold that moisture. Ultimately, it's going to want to find its way to a cold surface and condense on that. So it is a big problem. One of the things that can exacerbate it, for example, is hanging up wet clothes inside, and so
anything that has moisture, I guess.
Exactly.
So what can you do about it, Greg?
What can you do? The answer is ventilation. So you need to allow that moisture to get out. So that's to reduce the moisture load within the air. We're very lucky in Adelaide that we typically have relatively low ambient humidity. Even throughout winter. So we're in a fortunate situation in that respect. But yeah, really the answer is, the most simple answer is to open some doors and windows at the right time.
And what is the right time?
To deal with that? Well, when it's relatively nice conditions outside, you don't want to be opening doors and windows when it's 2 degrees outside, because you are bringing your inside air temperature down. As I mentioned earlier, there's the more sophisticated options where you can have a heat recovery ventilation systems, which is an expense that will typically go into the more high performing homes. Another simple option that a lot of people choose, and our friends over in the East Coast, where they have less kind ambient humidity levels, they'll go out and buy a dehumidifier unit.
I was wondering about that.
And collect. So that's
very common in Asia too, isn't it? To be using those
in the high humidity areas. That's one solution you can go down.
Can I just ask though, would David have been better though I know this sounds bad, but perhaps not to have done such a perfect job, to have left some gaps? Is that what you need to factor in?
There's a difference between uncontrolled and controlled ventilation.
Right.
So you want to have control. That's really important. So the general approach is to make the building as airtight as possible, but you need to have a way of controlling the ventilation so you manage the indoor air quality.
Now, we're going to try to get through as many as we can. Sam's been waiting from West Lakes. Greg O'Grady is listening to you, Sam.
Good afternoon. Just a question about wooden floors. I've got some polished wooden floors in the house with rugs and runners over the top, but I know that the air circulation underneath the floor is particularly good, and what happens is it results in cool air radiating from the wooden floor, and quite a breeze around the ankles sort of thing. I was just wondering if there's anything I can do, apart from covering over the wooden floors, which would defeat the whole purpose, if there's anything I can do to reduce this cold air coming off the floor.
Yep. So I mentioned before about the ceiling insulation being very important. R5 is a typical number you should aim for pretty much across Australia. Where you've got timber floors, you do need to have ventilation in your subfloor space. So that's where you'll see the bricks with the holes in the bottom on the outside leaf of the wall, or whatever the construction might be. Ideally, and access can sometimes be very, very difficult, but a lot of people will look to try to retrofit polyester insulation underfloor. It's done quite commonly if you've got access to the underfloor area to do so. So an R2, R2.5 polyester, and the reason for polyester is it is not susceptible to problems with damage with water, and the rodents and little critters don't like to necessarily go in and make nests and homes in there. Wind washing is a problem. So some people may even have insulation, underfloor insulation, but you do get a degradation in performance if you do happen to have high breezes going through that subfloor space. But yeah, not easy, not easy, especially if you don't have access to the underfloor area. And there's certain things like that. There's case by case has to be looked at.
While we're talking about floors or underneath houses, Donna's texted in and said, we have a timber home on poles.
Yep.
How do we insulate underneath the house?
Yeah, well, that's
going to be a tough question, isn't it? Well, no.
Well, not necessarily. It depends on the accessibility. As I mentioned with my place in Belair, it's effectively up on poles as it was, and so had plenty of access, and so I could have easily gone through and insulated that area because I had the accessibility to do so. Instead, I've put a whole new basement level underneath, and so it's changed it all completely. But really, the underfloor situation, it is solvable, but accessibility can be the challenge, and then it's a site-by-site analysis.
Okay. Had another text who said, in the UK, we had a small hinged window in our bedroom to vent out humid air without allowing Arctic draft in. I guess that's what you're talking about, being a controlled environment,
exactly.
Maybe.
Controlling. So the positioning of the windows, getting cross flow ventilation is incredibly important. In places like the UK, they're a bit smarter than us here, and they'll tend to build on a smaller footprint and multi-story as opposed to our Aussie sprawl, and they can take advantage of the stack effect where you've got the convective air rise from the low levels in the base and the ground floor to the higher windows in the upper floor to allow that moist, warm air to find its way out.
Yeah, a lot of people asking about the floorboard questions. I'm glad we addressed that one. Robert is in Lyndoch. Robert, we might make you our last caller for today. Hello.
Oh, hi there, Sonia and Greg. Yeah, look, just got a question. If we can ever work out how to retire and move off the icebox house we're in on our property at the moment and build again, I've always loved the look of the old homestead style with a big wide veranda all around the house, like 3 metres wide, a decent veranda. But nowadays all of the houses seem to be just a square box without even an eave. But is it worth the expense, apart from the look, which I love, is it worth the expense of putting a veranda all the way around your house to keep heat off your windows and so forth?
I think so. That's what I'm doing.
If you've got the space, I guess.
Well, and again, we get to the problem where the modern developments, if you look at any of them, they you've got a certain size block, and it's like people look at the setback off the boundaries, and they say, okay, I've got a metre here and 60 centimetres here, or whatever it might be, and they draw a rectangle and say that's the size my house has to be, and then they just try to, they don't pay any attention to the roof structure or the eaves, these zero eave things. I really don't like it myself. I'm an advocate, and the efficient electric home style advocates would be saying to build on a smaller footprint, and yes, have the eaves all the way around the house. The sun protection is a very important aspect, and particularly on the north side, so that you effectively shading all of your windows on the northern side from the spring equinox through summer and around to the autumn equinox. So you don't get the direct sun into those northern windows through the warm months of the year and those shoulder seasons. But then you come to this time of the year through the winter, and the sun will absolutely spill in and give you effectively free, very comfortable heat when it is sunshiny.
Yeah. Now, we started last week talking to you about the benefits of double glazed versus curtains. Someone's adding on to that roller shutters.
Yes, yeah.
Which, what value do they have?
The external shading, as I talked about last week, is very important, particularly on the east and western side of the house. If you happen to have any windows on that side, typically you try to design so that you reduce or eliminate any glazing on the east and western side of the house. But if you do happen to have that, then external shutters like the roller shutters will do a great job.
And very quickly, Pete's asking, how effective at reducing summer heat are reflective stick-on films for windows?
Yes, I don't have specific experience with them myself, but there are products that you can retrofit that will help. There, in the case of the hot western sun, it's
minimal.
It's going to give some benefit, but again, you need that external shading and even the internal blinds, so you can get a little bit of a thermal performance improvement with some of these adhesive films, but it's teetering around the edges to a certain degree. But it's a compromise. Like your views to the west might be fantastic. You've got a beautiful outlook, and you want to enjoy that. So we need windows. We need that natural light. So site by site, you've got to look at what's the most important, and there's going to likely be a bit of compromise, and you balance that.
So there might be different answers depending on your house and where that's located and what you're dealing with.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, Greg, look, thank you for joining us. Some really interesting answers there. And look, I reckon we could probably get you in several more times and still have questions to answer for you. But you're making the best with what you've got, trying to make it as thermally efficient as possible, basically.
And the answer is not to do knock-down rebuilds. So we've got some beautiful bones in our existing homes. Hold on to that, make use of it. Do what's called a deep retrofit to improve that thermal performance. Do things like get off your gas appliances and go all electric. Join Facebook groups like My Efficient Electric Home, which is a huge community of people all around Australia and even internationally that will help provide some of the advice that you need and answer these questions in a really useful community forum. I've learnt a lot from that. I contribute to it. There's a lot that people can do to educate themselves and understand a bit more about what's going to make for comfortable living and lower energy bills.
If we're going to take anything away from this, is maybe focus more on these core things than the aesthetics.
Yeah, you don't want like the stone bench tops and the butler's pantries and all these other things that people think they need. Let's just go back a little bit and have a home that's going to be comfortable, is not going to break the bank every time a bill comes in. And you don't want to be masking the energy bill problems by just thinking that you're going to put on solar panels. You see, like days like today, there is no sun, and so you don't want to be saying, I spent all these money on solar panels and my house is freezing today because it's cost too much to run all the air conditioning, the heating and whatever. So looking at the bigger picture.
You can get the stone bench tops later. Do the core things first.
Yes.
Greg O'Grady, thank you for that. And we'll try and get you in again because a lot of people wanting to hear your advice on these things. He's an electrical engineer and through personal experience, an expert on creating thermally efficient homes. It's 28 minutes to 3 here on ABC Radio Adelaide.